Well, welcome everyone. We're going to go through introductions, but first of all, thank you for attending tonight and for watching this video. We'll be recording this event and we'll do our best to get this posted on our school district website so that you can see it on our YouTube account. We're trying to put this together. We will not have a formal presentation. We put it together as questions, so we'll split that amongst the three of us. We will do our best to answer the questions, but if any of your questions do not get answered, there's other avenues to get them addressed. One of them would be by phone call. Go ahead and reach out to our office at 320-564-4081. You can email me at rschneider@isd2190, or you can call and set up an appointment. I'd be glad to meet with you and either give you a tour or try and address your questions to the best of my ability. We will have a hard stop tonight at no later than 6:30 because we have another meeting starting in person in our auditorium at 7 o'clock. Well, I didn't introduce myself, so I will now. I'm Superintendent Rich Schneider of Yellow Medicine East Schools, and to my right.
Thanks, Rich. My name is Michael Hart. I'm a municipal advisor, financial advisor for the school district, and I work for PMA Securities.
And I'm Preston Early. I'm president of R.A. Morton. My firm is a construction management company that has been working with the district on identifying the needs of the district and to this point. And then if the referendum were to be successful, then we would be the construction manager managing all the daily activities of the construction process.
So once again, thank you for attending. We're going to go through a few questions. If you have questions, you can add them to the comment, and we'll eventually try and get to them to the best of our ability. Background information on how we got to today. So there was a process that we used to develop our plan, but I will tell you we had basically some things that we did in the background. Our first thing was a facilities analysis. We actually have done 2 facilities analysis in the last 5 or 6 years to try and determine what we should do with our buildings and the next steps. We needed to go through that process and find out what the weaknesses were for our building. The other thing that we did is we did take a look at what are our options and how do we get to today, because our board was not comfortable making these decisions on their own. They wanted to have input from the community, so we did conduct a survey. They also wanted to put together a facilities focus group. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Preston. He's going to kind of explain what process we used to get community input so that it wasn't just a board or a superintendent decision. So you want to address that, Preston?
I'd love to. As Superintendent Schneider had mentioned, that we established a facility analysis process where we went through all parts of the building, identified the items that were accessibility related, code related, educationally challenged along the way, and out of that facility analysis, we established a focus group that was intended to really gain a lot of community input along the way, along with listening sessions that gathered information that allowed us to hear some feedback from the people that not only use the facilities on a continual basis, but also those community members that are using the facility and or have that interest in understanding what those needs are. The focus group looked at a number of different options that we had developed, from maintaining only spaces or updating from a maintenance standpoint, and then started looking at the oldest parts of the building and what it would take for those to be maintained versus replacement. And ultimately the focus group had looked at a number of options and then had decided on the proposal that is being presented here in this referendum. So it really was a lot of community input, gathered not only those informational pieces on how to address the academic questions, but then also the costs associated with those, and then also looked at the financing part of what those options would ultimately cost and a tax impact. So that was primarily the process, Rich, that we went through and determined from that focus group what to be presented, not only in the survey, but eventually in the referendum that's coming.
Well, thank you. It's important to understand that we took a look at everything from doing nothing to completely demolishing our facilities here and starting completely over. All right, I'll try and address that in a question later as we have time. So the 4 options we took a look at and in conjunction with the board weighed out were to upgrade our current facilities, which was a $30 million ask, to upgrade our current facilities plus connect the 2 buildings. We call that a bridge. So that was going to cost approximately $34 to $36 million. Then the third option we took a look at, which was a $60 million price, replace the oldest part of the high school, add a connection or a bridge between them, and then update Burt Rainey Elementary. That was $60 million, as I said. And then the 4th option we took a look at is to replace middle school, high school, and replace BRE and do everything to update it. The plan we're taking a look at will be in phases. We have basically 5 phases that we would do. And you can see those by going to our website and see that there are 5 different parts. We'll have a new middle school, high school, a new elementary, then we'll connect the 2, and then we will upgrade our current facilities that we are retaining, which is the best parts of our building, the 2019 building, the 1980 gym, and then the portion of the 1965 building. We'll upgrade all of that. The final thing, the final phase that we have talked about is adding a CTE wing. CTE stands for Career Technical and Education. That would be like agriculture, wood shop, those types of courses that we would add into that area. That would be a separate part. We would do that in phases, and the biggest advantage of that is our students can stay in place. We don't have to rent another facility or find another place to educate our kiddos, so we would do it in phases and get that done. Approximately 2.5 years worth of work will go into this to get it completely done, but a lot has to be determined. We just know that if this is approved, it would cost about $74.395 million. So we're going to pull in Michael with that, and I own multiple properties. How do I know how much that's going to cost me?
Thanks, it's a great question. So the bond referendum, if it passes, will be paid back over 30 years, and there will be a tax levied on the taxpayers of the entire school district to pay that back. For a $150,000 home, that tax is about $220 per year, or $18 a month. But as we know, many places in rural Minnesota, folks own multiple parcels. So we did build an online tax calculator. So we received the data from the counties, each of the counties that have parcels within the school district. And on the district's website, you can go in and input the parcel ID for each parcel that you own, and it will show you the tax that you have expected, estimated, if this referendum passes in terms of the tax increase for the school district. And so you can add those together. You can find your parcel ID a couple of different ways when you're going to plug that in. One way is you can look at your tax statement that you have received from the county. They're going to send you that in the spring. They also send you a valuation notice in the spring each year, in the month of March. And then in the fall, in November of each year, you receive a proposed tax levy amount. And each of those 3 documents that you receive from your county will have that parcel ID number on it. And you should, as a taxpayer, receive that for each of them. The other way to find it, if you don't have those documents handy, is to go to the county website. And each of the counties has a way to search for the parcel ID via the county website, and you can plug those in. If you're having trouble with that calculator. We've also built a spreadsheet that we have given to the superintendent here. If you have multiple parcels and you provide those parcel IDs, we can add it all up for you. The most important thing is that we believe it's really important for you to understand the impact and be transparent about this. And we've gone to great lengths to calculate this for every single parcel in the school district so that you know what you're voting on as a community.
Thank you. We know that the expense is the biggest part of it. So Michael, let's take a step further. Talk to us a little bit about egg to school credit, because we know that a lot of this expense is going to fall onto agriculture properties.
Yeah, so this is really important, and if you look at some of the materials the district has on the website educating voters about this, you'll see a number on there that says that about $40 million of the project is paid by the state. And so I think it's a fair question to say, how can that be true? And that's related to the Ag to School credit. So this is a credit that has been in place for several years now, where the state of Minnesota pays 70% of the tax related to a bond for school districts for agricultural land and building properties. And for the YME school district, more than 75% of your overall valuation qualifies for this credit, which means that about 53% of the overall project, or about $40 million, is paid by the state of Minnesota's taxpayers. Now, this credit is a couple important things about it. One, if you own the land and it's classified in agricultural land and buildings, you do not need to do anything to be eligible to receive this credit. It is automatically applied by the county as a part of their process. The credit has been around for several years and has continued to grow since it was first implemented. And it is, there has been some question about whether or not this credit would stay around or whether or not it's guaranteed. And I think it's important to note that it has had broad support at the state legislature in terms of putting this in place. And it has grown. It's been very, very important for some of the school districts around you who have made improvements to their buildings. I think many of the community are aware that many of your surrounding school districts have made improvements. And as a taxpayer in the state of Minnesota, you are helping fund those school districts too through this credit. And so it's, this is an excellent opportunity for you to take advantage of this offer from the state.
So Michael, the last question about egg to school credit, unless one comes through on the comment. One thing that always comes up in my meetings is, what type of assurance is there that this will continue? How do we know that the state won't reverse course?
Yeah, that's it's an important question. And, the straightforward answer is that the credit is a part of the general appropriation of the state budget, like the vast majority of school funding is. Most school funding comes from the state budget. And so the state legislature technically has the right to make a change at any time. Now, when you look at it, a couple of things I think make it very, very unlikely for that to happen. And that is, first, this particular credit has had broad bipartisan support from legislatures all across the political spectrum. And we have seen that consistently over the years as it was originally discussed and then implemented. And then further, it was increased after it was originally implemented because it was such a successful program. Secondly, the state of Minnesota has a long history, long track record of when they change something like a credit or some element of school funding or school finance, that they grandfather in school districts who are already benefiting from what's already in place, and maybe they would just turn it off for future school districts. That's the way they have approached things in the past. Doesn't mean that they're not required to do it that way, but there are many cases where they grandfather it in. And so I would see that as being more likely if they were to make a change to this. And there are many school districts across the state who have utilized this program, and there's a large constituency across the state that would be very negatively impacted and would be very vocal if there was any threat.
I think too, it's important to point out the role that agriculture plays in our state. We market ourselves as an agriculture-rich state, so I think this would be definitely one thing that would work against the agriculture economy. Safe to say, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely, that's true. And I think there was the reason the program was put in place originally is there was an acknowledgement that the property tax burden for school buildings was abnormally high on agricultural land. And this program has significantly reduced it. 70% of that tax is paid by the state taxpayers.
Yeah, and I think when they originally came out with it, 2017, is that correct?
Yep.
All right, they came out with it in 2017. The idea was that many schools could not pass any referendum to build a building because it was so expensive for agriculture properties, right?
I think that's true, and it's by no mistake that many school districts in western and southwestern Minnesota have done significant facility upgrades in the last several years because this has created a position where building those new facilities is much more affordable than it was prior to this credit being in place.
Thank you. All right, Preston, I touched a little bit on the timeline. Let's jump into that. So can you explain a little bit more about the timeline for the new school?
Sure. As we know, the referendum is coming here in August. There'll be a expectation that things will go very quickly. We want to make sure that we take the right amount of time to have the design team look at the documents, get everything put together. And so there'll be a period of time, which is primarily that spring into fall time, where it'll be the information put together in the documents, the plans and specifications that will be bid out. We are looking at this as a bid timing where it would be from this fall of 2025 into early spring of 26, because we'll order things along some of the long lead items first to get those coming, and then finish up with some of the finishes at a later point in time. We do feel that it would be ideal timing to start bidding this fall, and that we would start construction in the late spring, early summer of 26. Now, there'll be a phasing approach for this construction. As you mentioned earlier, that we are going to keep everything here on site, and we don't want to disrupt the daily education. So we'll look at the high school, middle school as the first part of the construction period, which is located in an area that it is not occupied by school building today. So we can build that first. Then we can transition into the elementary school and some of those common areas, and then finish up with the career tech and ed. And so we're scheduled to finish this by the end of the year 2028. So that's about that 2.5-year time period that we had discussed earlier with this phasing approach. And there'll be more detail coming out when the referendum is really known, the outcome of that, but that is a general timeline of the design process to when we finish construction. So it is a lengthy period of time, but it was very thoughtfully reviewed with the focus group that it was important to phase it as we've just structured it in this proposal.
And correct me if I was wrong, that's one of the reasons, that's the biggest reason we chose to do an election in August instead of November, because if we did it in November, not likely we got a shovel in the ground in 2026, correct?
It would be
Tough.
delaying that much time period, and then starting construction in a fall season, which isn't necessarily ideal, because then you have winter conditions that you're dealing with from the start. So this timing seemed to be very efficient and appropriate timing for the project.
And if we delay it another year, increased expenses, correct?
Construction inflation continues, and that's been a historical trend. And actually, we've seen construction inflation over the past few years outpace the average over time. So anytime you delay a project, it's going to cost more. And that's another reason why this timing was good.
Good. So one of the questions I want to address is what the role of the school board was throughout this. I said in the beginning that the board didn't want to decide this on their own. They wanted to get voter input, and we used a survey to determine that. So just briefly, a summary of that survey: 58% of the people were in support of it. Was the survey accurate? We believe so. we got a return rate of about 23%. That means that the margin of error was about 4%. 23% maybe to some people doesn't sound like a high return rate, but it actually was. 23% is well above the national average of 17% that they normally see. So we tried to get input from the community throughout the process, so the board wasn't alone in making this decision. They know that it's the community school. Another question that often comes up, how will new schools make the community stronger? I think anytime a school or a district or a community invests in their community, they're sending a strong message to the students, the families, and their community that they believe in the product that they're producing and they want to invest, and students understand and take value in that. It's important to understand that when we do build a new school, there's something for everyone. Everything from fine arts to the CTE we talked about. We've also talked about adding on extra space for early learning. Preschool has become a big part of our district. In fact, we just added another full-time preschool classroom, and we still have our shortened days or our shortened weeks for our 3 and 4 year old. So we're trying to address early learning. In the not too distant future, we will continue to examine daycare as a possibility because of the needs for daycare within our community. I can tell you right now with our current facility, we simply do not have the facilities to offer daycare because it takes some special classroom setup in order to address that. Michael, we're going to jump back to you and talk a little bit more about finance. This is a big burden for people, but there's an option out there for people living on a fixed income. You want to talk a little bit about the homestead tax credit refund program?
Yeah, thanks. So this is an important program. We talked a lot about the Ag to School credit already. This is a program that's really beneficial for homeowners, particularly those living in one of the towns. Whether or not you're in Granite Falls or Echo or Clarkfield or Hamley Falls, Hazel Run, one of these communities in your school district. The Homestead Property Tax Credit Refund is a program for all property taxpayers across the state of Minnesota, where the state has a table that says if your property taxes are at a certain level as it compares to your income, they will refund back to you a portion of those property taxes. And so when we look at that, this could be really significant because if you live in a $150,000 home, which is roughly the median home in the school district, your taxes are going up $220 a year if this is implemented. So we talked about that already, but for example, if you live in Granite Falls and you live in a $150,000 house and your household income, so the household income is, all the folks living in your house is $75,000, then of that, this homestead credit refund would increase by about $153 estimated by our calculations. So you pay $220 more, but if you file the form and you get this refund, you're going to get $153 more back than you would before. So you net those two things out, it's about $67 of difference. The math looks very similar in the other communities across the school district, and this is particularly helpful for those folks that that are living in town in a typical home with a median income that is pretty typical in your school district. This does phase out as your income rises. It totally phases out at about $140,000 for household income, but it significantly declines for most taxpayers once you hit about $100,000 for household income. But particularly if you're on a fixed income and you're looking for, is there some kind of relief for this type of tax increase, there is a program out there. Now, importantly, that's different than the Ag to School credit. In order to receive this homestead property tax refund, you do have to file a form with the state of Minnesota. So you would pay the property tax in, as it comes on your property tax bill, or if you're paying a mortgage, oftentimes it would be paid through your mortgage payment. And then you would file a form called the M1PR form. And that form is certainly something that you may want to work with a tax professional on providing. It's similar in form to other tax return forms that you file with the state or federal government. And that M1PR form is what determines your eligibility to receive that homestead property tax refund. So the short story is here, if you're eligible based upon your income and the property that you own, it's possible that you're going to receive back a significant portion of the increase in taxes through this homestead refund.
Preston, can you address how long will new schools last? You know, this is a big investment. How long will this new school last if it's approved?
The length and timeline of school buildings is always a big question that comes out, and there can be kind of a set standard that are for most public buildings. And most public buildings are built to last a period of years. You know, whether that's 60, 70, 80 years, that's kind of the general timeline before you start to look at some serious things again. Just like any capital piece of property that you own or equipment, there's always things that you need to maintain during that timeline. Much like you change oil in your car or you replace your roof at home, these buildings will have maintenance items that you will also need to focus on or plan for. Roof replacements, some mechanical items replacement, normal things like carpeting and painting. Those are all maintenance items that will be needing to be addressed over that period of time that the buildings are in use. And so these aren't facilities that are planned to be regenerative quickly. They are meant to last quite a period of time because they are public buildings. That's part of why, you know, the costs are such, because you're using materials that will last a period of time. But it is a long-term investment that you're having here. And as Michael mentioned earlier, you've got the length of your bond here, but the building itself will last much longer than that.
Okay. You know, one question I sometimes get is, well, did we not take care of the current building? Well, we take a look at the wing that we're sitting in here of the 1930 building, facing the new courthouse here. It's 95 years old. There's some infrastructure that simply do not last that long, correct?
Yes.
Like plumbing?
Plumbing was one of the items that we really found in this building. And plumbing is not one thing that you can easily fix either. It is in the walls, it's in the floors, it's, you know, major things that happen with that, but it wears out over time. And that's why really we looked at this building and determined that there were, you know, infrastructure things that were pretty major that needed to be addressed.
Yeah, so we take a look at, for example, our bathrooms. If you've been on the in this building here, you know, going into some of those bathrooms, that's not very accessible, right?
Accessibility is another really important thing, and those that have been in this building, 1930s, accessibility wasn't an item. You look at all the steps coming into the building. You look at the bathrooms where you have to step up a step. There were no elevators at that time. But, you know, with not only code requirements, but just, you know, good community standard, you want the building to be accessible for everyone. And this building will be accessible in all phases. With different levels, sometimes you got to make adjustments still with elevators and such, but it is that is a requirement and good practice to be accessible with every part of the building.
You know, accessibility is one of the areas we did focus on. We did produce a video on accessibility. I encourage you to go to our YouTube channel and take a look at that. It kind of points out something that for many of us working in the building is pretty obvious. If a student is in the upper floor of this 1930 building and they want to go all the way over to Mr. Lallam's health class, which is all the way in the other 1965 building, which is a transition our kiddos need to make, that is a process where you're going to have to go through a elevator, a long hallway, through the lunchroom, to another elevator, and up to that top floor to get to Mr. Lallam's health class. that is going to require a student to leave class about 5-6 minutes early to make that trek. It's quite a trek. And as Preston alluded to, it's a 1930 building. It's just simply not set up for the accessibility that is expected under statute now. It's required to provide those opportunities for kiddos, and we want to do a little bit better job with that. All right, Preston, you want to talk a little bit about how the bid process will be handled, and will local contractors have an opportunity to participate?
Yes, that was one of the board's objectives very early on, is they wanted this to be a process that would be transparent and inclusive of community members. And that really follows all the way down to the bid process. Under the agency construction management process is what we will provide here. It'll break the project down into individual bid sections, which makes it easier and or capable for the local contractors to be active participants in the project. Of course, there are standards and statutes we have to follow in this competitive bid process that makes a set of details for every contractor bidding. They have to follow those rules and regulations, the state statutes. Sometimes the local contractors are very well capable of all of those standards and fit right into the program. Sometimes it becomes a little bit of a challenge if they are a smaller firm, but we look at this as not only the firms from the local area, but the firms that have employees that live in this area too, as being very important. And so we'll break those packages down into smaller pieces so that it's easier for the local contractors to be part of this project. And we certainly want to make them aware of this as those bid documents go out, and then they'll determine whether or not this is a project that works well for them.
Okay, thank you. One of the questions that has come up in our conversations, especially our community meetings, how do aging facilities negatively impact learning? Well, I can tell you, just based upon the square footage in each classroom, that it varies a little bit. In fact, we have to submit what's called a review and comment to MDE. Right now, they have they will push back quite a bit unless a classroom is 900 square feet. I can tell you, looking at our building, we really only have 2 classrooms that are even approaching 900 square feet. So the learning environments are a lot bigger. Part of it is because we have kiddos in there, oftentimes with disabilities, but part of it is because we don't teach the same way we did back in 1930 or 65 or even 52 and 59, which is the ages of our buildings. One question that has come up is, why aren't you building a new school in a new location? Preston can probably piggyback off this, but I can tell you, for me, it came down to expense.
It came down to expense, being more expensive to find a new piece of property and build the entire square footage. But it also was looking at what are the assets that you currently have. And there are good pieces of your current facility. In fact, your auxiliary gym is not very old. You know, it's a handful of years old, very important for community input on that project and contribution. And so we looked at the facilities that were good candidates to build around. And so from a cost standpoint, that became less expensive. From a community standpoint, we thought that made more sense. The focus group really did look at that as being a key part of what they wanted to see out of this, was to maintain the good parts of what you do have, but understanding that there are needs that some of the existing buildings just couldn't accommodate anymore.
Thank you. One question that I got at one of our community meetings dealt with enrollment and population trend. First, I'll address the population trend for Yellow Medicine County as a great example. It is declining enrollment. We know that our population is getting older. We're having a hard time attracting people to our communities, but that is the trend that's happening in a lot of rural areas of Minnesota. So that is impacting then our enrollment, and we are seeing declining enrollment. Over the past 2 years, we have slowed that process significantly, and we know now that right now we have registered for our kindergarten class for this fall. We have 51 kiddos registered for that, so that's a strong number. I believe, Crystal, there's 48 seniors, is that right? 48 seniors, so that 51 is just 3 higher, but every student counts. As we talk about in funding schools, especially a school our size, that's about $10,000 per student. Michael, let's go back to you and let's talk, when do we start paying the higher taxes and for how long?
Yeah, it's a good question. So if the bond is approved in August, the school board will go through a process, as they do every single year, to put a property tax levy in place in the fall for the following year. So that process starts in September each year and then is finalized in December for taxes payable in the following year. So this fall, it will be for taxes payable in 2026. So if this is authorized in August, the tax levy related to the bond will be part of that process this fall, and taxpayers would see the increase in taxes on their tax levy for taxes payable in calendar year 2026. And with the way that the bond is set up, it is set to extend for 29 years from that point forward. And so the total number of dollars levied will stay the same over that period of time, or relatively the same as the bond payment will be structured and set to go through that whole time period. One question that's been asked, is the tax rate the same, or is it the total number of dollars in terms of payment the same? And this is along the lines of, if the property value of the entire district goes up, and every property value went up by relatively the same amount, you would still have the same share of property taxes that are owed by your property, even if your property value was higher. And over time, property values do tend to rise. And now there can be dips, and it could go up and down some over time, but over a 29-year period of time, we would expect to see them rise some. And so the other thing that will happen, though, is that if your property goes up more than the average across your school district, for example, if you put an addition or made an improvement on your home, you would likely expect to see your property value go up. And if that would happen, you would pay a little bit larger share of the overall tax levy, and vice versa. So if your neighbors are all putting additions on their house and you don't, then you will pay a relatively smaller share of the overall burden. And this is also true with agricultural land values, as they can go up and down over time. Over the last 5 years or so, agricultural land values have increased significantly in this area and all across western and southwestern Minnesota. We are expecting them to decline some for property valuations for taxes payable in 2026. So those have been valuations that property owners would have seen and received from the county in March of this year as of January 1st. And so when we are running our tax impact numbers and what's on the tax calculator, and what we're presenting with people is the best, most current information we could get from the counties that is showing those property valuation declines already built in. So we're trying to be as fair as possible over time, but that's part of the process.
All right, another question I want to address is, how will these new facilities serve all residents of the school district? A school district isn't just for our current students. We know we have community ed activities. Another example is an auditorium. The new facility will have an auditorium. Preston, you want to kind of talk a little bit about this auditorium and how the music is going to appear in this facility?
So the spaces are all to be yet designed fully, but the concepts that we have have been what has been explained already. And so all of the components, like the auditorium, will be designed and function so that it can take advantage of not only the performances and the things that you have on an activity standpoint, but also for daily class use. If there are things that can be held in there, large groups, community events. So the acoustical lighting and all of those things will be, current for today's kind of standards. The auditorium is one example, but if I can piggyback onto that with some of the other spaces, there's some real trends in today's marketplace on what school districts, especially rural districts, are focusing on. We talked a lot about CTE or career tech education as being one of those items that is really a trending part. Why is that? One is the name indicates, it's a career learning environment. And not every student is set or interested in a four-year college degree. And there's a real lack of career job or people to fill those jobs in trades, whether that would be construction or electrical or welding, all of those types of things that career tech will teach. Those trends, I don't think, are going to change quickly. Those are going to be long lasting, where those are important for students to have that background. So that's one trend that is very different than it might have been at the time that your facilities were built. Also, flexible learning spaces are a trend, and the reason for that is in the 1930s or even the 60s, when a lot of this building was built, it's long corridors with hallways that are classrooms on either side of the space, and everything was lined up. The desks in the classrooms were all lined up. The teacher taught at the front of the classroom. But today it's a lot more interactive and collaborative, where small groups come together and staff is teaching, in smaller groups to larger groups. So the spaces that will be designed in this will accommodate a lot more of that flexible learning. And that's part of the reason why the classroom sizes might be bigger today too, because it takes more space to create all of those from what it was historically. But you look at all of those kinds of spaces as really being varied from what traditional design was from the early 1900s all the way up to, probably the last 10 years it started to change, where you end up with some of those collaborative spaces.
So one of the big features of this new school is going to be a new kitchen and a commons area, right? We'll host a lot more of our students, correct? Maybe multiple serving lines so we can feed students faster. They have a little bit more time to enjoy their lunch.
And the biggest benefit is that the elementary students no longer will have to cross the parking lot to get to the cafeteria. It'll all be one, and it really is efficient space, because you now have everything in one spot for all of those grades. And you have that now, but it wasn't very convenient, not only from accessibility, but also from elements. But the cafeteria space, oftenly referred to as commons, is really, again, more of a flexible space. It's a gathering space for all the activity spaces. It's a gathering space for the students to come together in a larger group. And it also serves out of the kitchen, where it's not just a single line where everybody got the same scoop of something that comes in. There's a few more choices today. So you can set up different lines for your lunch and move the students through. And of course, size large enough to accommodate your population here, so that you don't end up serving lunch all day long. It fits into your educational schedule. But that space too becomes a lot more of a flexible and can be used for a variety of different things, not just lunch or greeting space. It can be used for a variety of things.
Yeah, a great example of this, he talks about how we can serve more students quickly. We're starting at 10:45 right now with our preschool kiddos start lunch at 10:45, and we run all the way. Our middle school and high school ends their lunch at about 1 o'clock. So that's starting pretty early for a lunch at 10:45, and so that has an impact on our students also. We do have a pretty strong snack program for our elementary, and part of the reason is because they're eating so early. CTE spaces, we talked a little bit about that. You want to talk about where that location would be?
So the new location that we are proposing in this is at a location that is very convenient for the middle school, high school students. It will be new space. that again will be sized appropriately with the right kind of equipment and technology in that for that career tech. And it's also designed to be flexible so that you can do a variety of things from building trades to potentially automotive. You know, if you've got the right teaching staff to accommodate all of those programs. But it is located at a space in the building that will not disrupt elementary and or the high school, you know, daily classes. It is kind of set aside on the opposite side of things. But again, designed and intended to be very up to date with current trends and flexible with spaces.
Yeah, so we currently have a pretty state-of-the-art greenhouse, and we're intending to put that into that new space, so that's all part of it, so students don't have to cross the parking lot to get to that space. That's an example of a CTE space that we're leaving the building for. Another one is our small engines are actually housed out in our facilities and grounds garage space where we store a lot of our snow equipment. That's where we have those small engines. We don't have enough space for all of that learning area.
I failed to mention that it's attached to the building, so students don't have to go outside again to get to it.
Yeah, and then we'll have access to bathrooms without having to cross the parking lot to come back into the building, plus into our building. Speaking of busing into a building, you want to talk a little bit about what's a secure entrance? You know, we use that term quite a bit, and a lot of our neighboring schools have secure entrances, and we don't.
Again, that's a trend for a lot of different reasons. The secure entrances in any public building are important, but we also want to recognize this: we're not building a prison. You know, we're not really looking at it to be an uninviting space. So the secure entrance really is a checkpoint where we can control at a point of vision where people can come in, state their business, and then be directed where they can go. Often, too many times, and what you have today is once you get in that front door, and even though you might be buzzed in, once you're in the door, you can have free reign of the building. The secure entrances in this design will funnel people to the right places so that they can be excused to where they need to go, or just stay in the office and not have to come into the classroom areas or the hallways. So the secure entrance is really meant to be a control point to get the people to go to the right places, and also, you know, is a deterrent for any potential situation. But the secure entrance is a big part of what current trends are, and all new school buildings or updated school buildings have that type of secure entrance.
Okay. Thank you. Great explanation. One question that we would address in person too is, how do I vote? Well, there's a number of ways you can vote. You can vote by absentee by contacting either, you can go on the website, the Secretary of State's website, and get information about absentee ballot, or you can contact our Yellow Medicine County and vote. They'll mail you out the information for voting absentee, or you can go vote, and that started, I believe it opened on June 27th, and you can go directly to the Government Center, which is downtown here. It's a former Yellow Medicine County bank, I believe, and go right down there and vote in person, so that's an option. The other thing you can do, of course, is you can vote on Election Day. Election Day is on August 12th, and the polls will be open 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. at the Kilowatt Community Center. That is our combined polling place, and that's the place you can vote. So there are a number of ways that you can vote. I just ask that you make a plan to vote and you carry through and do that. So, Crystal, have we addressed most of the questions? Anything coming off of the comments?
Nothing but positive.
All right, awesome. Thank you everyone for attending tonight. Just a little reminder, we do have an in-person meeting tonight. We encourage you to get out and vote however you can. One thing, we're not done. If you have questions or if you would like a tour, You can set something up by calling our office, and one of us will give you a personal tour. If you have a group that you would like us to come, especially me, to come present to and provide information, I'd be glad to come and visit that, make a plan. If you want to bring a group of people in here, we'll make coffee and serve you coffee. I can probably figure out a way to get you a donut if you want to come on in and have a talk with me. We want to make sure you folks have all of the information that you can to make an educated vote. All right? I want to thank everyone for attending tonight, and hope to see you around somewhere. Go Sting!